This is Mark Von Bullock. You're listening to Don't Encourage This. Broadcasting just steps away from the exotic Miami University campus in scenic Oxford, Ohio. I'm your host, Mark Von Bullock. This podcast is a series of interviews and conversations with artists, creatives, interfaith voices, and occasionally even good-natured members of the geek community. You know who you are. I am a minister in the Presbyterian Church USA, and this episode, I want to introduce you to Eva Jade Landon. Eva Jade Landon is a pop recording artist from the United States, and she has toured all across the country, collaborating with artists like Grammy-nominated producer Dan Mathews. She was named Best Non-Local Pop Artist of the Year and the People's Choice Award by the Elephant Talk Magazine Awards in 2012, and was nominated for Best Female Pop Artist and Musician of the Year by the Indie Music Channel Awards and the Raw Awards, respectively. The single off her first full-length record, Evolution, titled If the Shoe Fits, was a popular on-air favorite on X1075 FM in Las Vegas, and she has been called the Mid-Atlantic's biggest secret by the Washington Examiner. She has a new album, Evolved, which drops on Spotify, Apple Music, and multiple platforms on October 1st. Eva and I have been friends for many, many years, and I wanted to have her on this podcast because in addition to being a recording artist and a musician, Eva also identifies as a practicing Zen Buddhist and a queer woman. She is committed to the work of interfaith dialogue and interfaith conversation, which is how she and I know each other. She currently serves as the program director at the Interfaith Center at Miami, here in Oxford, Ohio, where I have also served on the board of directors over the years. And I wanted to bring her on the program to discuss a variety of different topics, such as how language and representation matter in this realm of interfaith conversation, particularly with young people. We also talk a bit about the complexities of identity and queer representation in the music industry, how she has navigated those complexities in her own career and in her own life, and how she thinks pop music can be effective as a form of advocacy for social change. I also asked her to share with us one of my personal favorite stories of hers, which is the time that she performed for magician Penn Jillette, who is one half of the comedy magic duo Penn and Teller, at his house. This is a real story, and I'm pretty sure the time that Eva first shared this story with me was the moment that I knew that I really wanted to be friends with her. It's a wide-ranging conversation. It's a very eclectic conversation, and I enjoyed it very much, and I hope that you do too. Let's talk to Eva Jade Landon.
I grew up in Southern Maryland in a pretty rural part of the state. And I went to Catholic school. In 7th grade, we got a band class in my school. And that was when I started playing drums. So I was 12. And so that was my kind of entry point into music. And then I switched to public school in high school, actually in 8th grade. Yeah, I started playing drums for some garage bands in high school. And then I just, it ended up becoming obvious that everyone was just quite bad. It was so hard to find people who could play, or take it seriously. And I was so into, in high school, I really got into, this was when I really got into punk and Bright Girl. And I was very much I don't want to curse, but I want to F the patriarchy.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing. And it was started to broaden my perspective of society, I guess. And I was watching MTV too. Do you remember when Courtney Love took over the station for 24 hours?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I remember that specifically, but I remember MTV used to do a lot of gimmicks like that.
Yeah.
So it's possible that when would that have been? Was that in the 90s maybe?
I would have, when I was in high school, it would have had to been 2000s, but okay. It might have been a rerun from the 90s. I don't know.
But I remember MTV used to do that kind of stuff. Sure.
Yeah. I remember seeing like Courtney Love and I'd never seen a girl just kind of like, with her guitar and her like foot on the amp, like rocking. I was like, that's so cool. I'd been playing drums in band with some guys and I was like, I want you to teach me how to play a power chord. And so like I practiced playing a power chord for like 6 months. And then I started my own band and I was like fronting and singing in this band. I mean, I was terrible at the time, but that was kind of what set me off on that path. I guess it was a gradual transition between like drums to guitar. And then I kind of started picking up bass a little bit. And then by the time I was like 18, I got pretty good. And then that was when I joined a more serious band called Odd Girl Out, which was really like where like my quote music career, I guess, kind of started, because some of the best moments of my life playing music were with that band. We were actually quite successful. My father passed away when I was 17. So there was also a lot of emotional stuff going on. I left the church at that time, so I had this like conflicting relationship with religion for a little while.
Sure.
And I think that's kind of important because it definitely shapes. Like I watched religion do a lot of harm during certain years of my life. And that was sort of like a motivating factor in wanting to use it to do good.
Well, yeah. How many instruments do you play now?
I mean, that I can play well,
Sure.
I would say my primary instruments are guitar, bass, and drums. But I can kind of pick up instruments. If it's a string instrument of some kind, like I just had a lyre and I figured out how to play that, but I'm not a harpist, I've played mandolin a little bit in some bands. I can pick up different things. I can play a little bit of piano. It's a kind of a thing where if you have a base knowledge of music, there are a lot of, you can kind of dabble in things a bit more easy, but I wouldn't say that I played them.
Sure.
You know what
sure.
I mean? Like I wouldn't say I'm a mandolin player, because I don't have the correct like technique for that, but like I could play mandolin on some songs, and I've done that. When I was in Kansas City, I was in this it was like a country folk pop band called the B Sharps, which is a Simpsons reference if you did. And yeah, I played mandolin on a few songs for that. I even had a banjo, I think, at that point as well. So it kind of, you have some flexibility. I played xylophone for a while in high school as well. I mean, so like if you have a bass line, you can kind of just pick things up.
Sure.
But my primary three that I've like really been in positions in bands is like guitar, bass, and drums. And then of course vocals. So I was in Odd Girl Out for, I don't know how many years. People feel maybe 5 years, something like, it was quite a long time. And I was very young when I joined. I was like 18. And I started as the rhythm guitarist. I played everything in that band. It was an all-girl, all-queer band. So we had this big lesbian following. And
awesome.
We would do like pride tours.
That's amazing.
So we just went around and like we would headline Pride, or we even played like Toronto Pride. There's a venue in DC called the 930 Club. It's a very large venue. I've seen Bad Religion and Sleater-Kinney and like all these bands there, and like we played there as like on like at like a Pride event, and it was sold out. That was like one of the most, there were thousands of people there. We were doing like really big things. And this was also the time when like the L Word came out.
There was, yeah.
We played with like all these bands on the soundtrack. We played with the band that wrote the theme song for the L Word. Benny.
Nice.
We were in all the right places at all the right times. And it was kind of that moment where like lesbian bands were getting a lot of attention. But for some reason, it just never like happened for us. There was a bit of a interrelational conflict between me and the singer at the time. We're fine now. We're friends now. We actually did a reunion show several years later. And it
nice.
was really, really great. It was an amazing show as well. But at the time, it got to be like too much. But while I was in that band, it was a great experience too, because I played guitar, I played bass, and I played drums. I filled in every time we had somebody leave. I would just kind of pick up the slack. So it taught me to be very adaptable, versatile. After that, I decided I wanted to start my own band. So I started a project called Kitten on Capitol Hill, and I was fronting that, playing guitar. And that was quite successful, quite well received. A lot of the audience from Odd Girl Out kind of followed me with that project.
Sure.
But I mean, the way that things were going with the industry, it just felt that you weren't really going to be super successful playing rock music at that time. I mean, this was like, what, 2011 or something? Yeah. God, this makes me sound so old. I mean, pop music was really in that moment.
Yeah.
You know, if you were going to be able to make money off of this in like kind of a professional way. And I had always loved pop music. I loved Britney Spears growing up.
Oh yeah, sure.
I still love Britney Spears, honestly. But I've always loved pop music. And I think even when I played rock music, it had like a pop influence to it.
This love is a loaded gun.
I really like pop music too, and I have come to appreciate Britney Spears. When I was a teenager, I was like, "Oh, Britney!" And now, as an adult, I look back, I can appreciate what she really accomplished and the impact that she made on that industry.
And now, when you think about how she did all of that, and she was under a conservatorship for 10 years, where her own family took away her life and her money and her autonomy, it's horrible that we as a society even allowed that to happen.
Yeah.
She was America's sweetheart, you know? So yeah, I mean, I just always thought she worked with really good writers and producers. Like, she picked really good songs. Mm-hmm. And for people who knew me when I was younger, it didn't seem that crazy for me to do pop music. For people who only knew me in this kind of like rock and roll, like, they were like, "What are you doing? Like, you're selling out," you know? And I was like, "I'm not selling out. I'm like, I just want to sell something," you know, like,
fair.
I'm like, I need to eat. Like,
that's a pretty good line. I'm not selling out. I just want to sell something. That's pretty good.
I mean, I hate that, because it's like, you have to do what you have to do to survive. I like writing pop music. If I didn't like writing pop music, I wouldn't have just wrote another album, because I'm not doing it with the motivation to make money at this point. So that kind of bridged me into writing my first like solo EP, like this pop record.
Was that Loaded Gun?
Yes.
Because that was about 2011, wasn't it?
That was, yeah. So for a while I was doing both concurrently. I was in Kitten on Capitol Hill, and I was like, had just launched this kind of pop solo career, but I had a backing band that I played with. It was really, really well received, the release of the EP. And so then that kind of gave me more momentum to work on like the full length record. When I started working on the full length record, I actually received an offer from a record label. So I signed a digital and physical distribution deal with a record label in Las Vegas. Yeah. I mean, so there was like a lot of momentum around this like first record, Evolution. And I felt like things were finally, you know, I was like,
here we go.
I don't have to pay to get my album printed and distributed. Wow,
someone else is going to do that.
Yes. And I'll just get money from it. What? That's amazing. Right. Because you have to keep in mind, I sold my car to pay off my recording debt for that record.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yes. I recorded the whole album, and I needed to get the masters, and I didn't have the several $1,000s that I needed at the time to, and you know, because I mean, I was a kid. I don't even remember what I was doing then. I was probably like delivery driving at Pizza Hut or something. Like, I did not have like a real job that I could afford this.
But also, like, that's so like borderline. I mean, okay, this is my commentary on the record industry. I also feel like the fact that like an artist has to sell their car and pay thousands of dollars to get the masters and the rights, that is so, to me, like borderline predatory, I think. I mean, I get it. It's an industry. I understand, and the publishing and all blah, 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 but that just makes me physically sick that artists in America have to put themselves out like that just to own what they have created. I don't know. I know there's been a lot of discussion about that in the music scene the last couple of years, but it really, those stories make me sad. Artists should not have to kill themselves to that extent to just, I don't know. That's my soapbox about that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the trap that I was in wasn't that they were holding it, the record label wasn't holding the masters. What happened was that my record label was only agreeing to pay for the physical and digital distribution and not the recording costs.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So they didn't give me a full deal, which does happen a lot.
Sure.
I mean, labels are way more likely, or at least back then. I mean, I don't know. Labels are not even relevant now, I guess, because they're like the internet.
It's probably not nearly, I'm sure it doesn't make nearly as much money as it used to, because how can it? The internet, like you said, the internet is so saturated, the market is just carved up into little itty bitty pieces now.
Well, because it used to be that like labels really dictated like what people heard, but now people can hear whatever they want to hear. And if you can play in the right algorithms and you can get yourself on social media in the right way, and you can pay for your own digital distribution. Nobody's buying physical albums anymore, because this was back when people still bought CDs. I mean, again, this dates me, but when you still had a CD player in your car. Mm-hmm. So it was important to like have the physical record. And that was something that like labels still had a lot more like power this time. But you would often get these like half-ass deals. You wouldn't get it a full deal. Even if the label paid for the recording, then you can fall into the trap that you were talking about, where if you don't sell enough or you don't produce enough, then they can say, well, we own your music.
I hate that so much. I know it's part of the industry. I know. And I know it's how they make money and, but I hate it. I really don't like that side of the industry. Not that they care what I think, but...
No, right. They're like, oh, well, Mark said that's...
Thank you, Reverend, for your opinion. Duly noted.
They're like, we're going to reform all of our policies now. Thank you, Reverend. You've shown us the way of the Lord.
You've shown us the error of our ways.
Anyway, that was the situation I was in. Was just... Well, actually, I'm very glad I wasn't in a full deal, because what happened was that the record label situation blew up. I got dropped from the label right before the album came out. So it was a complete disaster. There was a whole thing where the, I don't know what you would call, like the CEO, I guess, of this label in Las Vegas was opening a new office in Miami. And so he was gone and he put his wife in charge. And I don't know why, but like women just feel that I want to steal their husbands. And like, I'm like, I would date you.
I was going to say, did she listen to the record?
Well, this was back when...
She's gay, lady.
Well, that record was not openly gay, you know, because this was also back when this was also back when like you couldn't really be openly gay and be like on mainstream radio.
Sure,
so I was always playing like the pronoun game with these things, not to the point of being inauthentic, but I would when I did like the If the Shoe Fits music video, I was the narrator, but I wasn't in the narrative. Right. So it was a heterosexual couple, but I wasn't like playing the girl.
Yeah. For those listening, the song that you're talking about, it's actually a really catchy song. And in the music video, kind of like you just said, you're telling this story about this young couple. And they have like a little meet cute in a bar or a restaurant or something.
Meet cute.
Yeah. And they, you know, the song is, the video is about them like, I don't know, meeting at a dance or something, and you're kind of in the background watching it. It's a really cute video, and it's a really catchy song. But like you said, that's a kind of a way to sort of play with singing about a straight relationship without pretending like you are straight yourself necessarily.
Yeah, of course, not everybody would see it that way. Some people would say, "Oh, you're pretending to be this way." But I always drew like a boundary for myself where I didn't feel like I was doing anything inauthentic, but I also wasn't being fully authentic at the same time, because if I had been, I would have just been in the narrative and it would have been with a girl. But yeah, it was like the little kind of like Cinderella type thing. She loses the shoe. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's a good video, but I was kind of always straddling that line. The thing is that my girlfriend at the time and I had been to record label events together. It was very obvious that like I was in a relationship with this girl, and I don't want to say this girl like I'm being.
No, I know what you're doing. You don't have to say this person's real name on the internet. It's.
Well, no, if she listens, I don't want her to be offended.
No. We want to respect her privacy.
Yeah, so it should have been obvious, but for whatever reason, his wife felt really threatened by me. So it kind of ended up, there was always this like weird tension. She was always trying to like create problems for no reason. So everything leading up to the CD release was really great. Like we had pre-sale orders. We sold out the show. Like we sold out the venue. And when it came time to get the records delivered, I was under contract for a specific amount of units. And I don't remember exactly how many that was now, but logic would have it that if you have a CD release event and it's sold out, you should send like all of the units, right? So that you can have the best chance possible of selling it.
Yeah.
She only wanted to send like half. And I felt really uncomfortable with that because I didn't want to be in debt to them. And I felt like we should be operating under the assumption that every single person who comes into the venue could buy one. So, like, why would you not even send me enough? She was trying to send me less than we even sold in tickets. And I was like, this doesn't make any sense. I don't know. It felt like she was trying to set it up so that I would default out of my contract, like that I wouldn't make the quota. And so I pushed back and I called her husband. And, she did not like that. That was, yeah.
You're like, can you just tell him I'm gay? Well, also, if she's not... Well, hold on a minute. If she's not sending enough records to sell at this event, theoretically, isn't she also losing money by selling less records? So, part of me is like, I'll show her. I'll lose money on her. Question. I don't know. This passive-aggressive plan makes no sense. I mean, I get she's trying to get to default on the contract, but, like...
Yeah, I think she just wanted to set me up to fail, like to not sell all the records.
Stupid.
And so, which, doesn't benefit them. But if her goal was to just like get them to drop me, so what ended up happening was they canceled my physical distribution deal right before the event. And I had to go to like Kinko's and print the album myself. Oh my gosh, it was so horrible.
If I could offer just the tiniest bit of constructive criticism to this lady, how about rather than doing that, don't do that, sell more records, and don't worry about any of this because she's gay.
Right. Nobody ever believes me. It's just, it doesn't, I don't know. And I hate the whole thing with like women pitting against women, but I think she felt I was like challenging her authority and trying to go around her. But I was only doing that because I felt she had put me in a position that felt very compromising. Like I was.
Yeah, she's actively undermining you.
Yeah, like she was setting me up to fail. And I just really didn't understand why. If she had just been honest, maybe it wasn't vindictive. Maybe it was for a financial reason. She could have just been honest. Like, actually, we can only afford to press this many right now.
Sure.
Okay, I would have taken that. I would have been like happy. But the way it all went down was really weird. And so then the CD release, I'm sitting there like the day of printing the record myself.
Oh my gosh.
It was horrible. It was just so crazy. And then the record label, so after the album came out, I put it on the internet myself.
Mm-hmm.
And because obviously I'm thinking the label dropped me. They terminated my physical distribution contract. They tried to sue me, like saying I owe them all this money because they were like, you're still under contract for digital distribution. And so I had to buy myself out of the contract.
As our listeners can clearly see, I'm rubbing my forehead in exhausted, pained.
Yes.
This is so stupid.
So like this was the music industry at this time. So I did sort of have that where luckily it wasn't like a situation where they owned the masters, but because I had signed a digital distribution contract, they told me I could not legally put my own music on the internet without buying them out. So it was just like one thing after the other.
Well, maybe if we'd sold enough records at the event, I'd have some money to buy this out. Jerk.
Oh my gosh. So then after all that happened, I guess I did a tour in New York I was playing with a band in New York for about 6 months. And I got so burnt. I was just so burnt out.
Yeah.
So exhausted. After all of this happened, it was just like, it felt like I was finally like at the threshold and then it just blew up in my face. And I just like, it was like one thing after the other. And that was when I was just like, I quit doing the pop music and I went to Las Vegas and joined the Dirty Panties and just was like, I'm just going to go play drums in a punk band.
I was about to say, this is the moment in the podcast we should clarify the Dirty Panties is the name of a band and not...
I was not selling my underwear online.
Not a sex shop in Las Vegas.
Please don't DM me.
Oh, hold on. Oh, but I do need to ask you, actually, speaking of when you went to Las Vegas, I do need to ask you to tell the story. Because this was the moment, really, when you and I first started getting to know each other, that my brain turned from like, oh, Eva's a really cool person in Ohio to get to know to like, oh my God, I really want to be friends with Eva. Because while you were playing music in Las Vegas, you played a gig with Penn Jillette from Penn and Teller. Is that right? Could you please tell like a little bit of this story?
So when I was playing in the Dirty Panties, I joined this other band called the Negative Nancys. I also had weirdly gotten involved with Sunday Assembly. For anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's a secular church. So it's like this idea that there are like mental health benefits to like being part of a church community.
Sure.
Statistically, there are less suicides and all these things. So they were trying to like emulate the community aspect of church without the dogma for people who had like been harmed by religion. So I volunteered to play bass for them because I had some friends who were like part of this group. Some that were very involved with like Church of Bacon and all of this. This kind of pushed me into like the atheist community in Las Vegas, which we know Penn Jillette is their leader.
Yeah, Penn Jillette, of course, is one half of the magician duo Penn and Teller. Very outspoken atheist. Many, many years was a very outspoken libertarian. I think he's kind of softened up on that stuff a bit. But yeah, that's 100% his scene.
Yes. So he had this mansion in Vegas that he had been trying to sell for a while, I guess. And at some point, the people from Sunday Assembly and the Church of Bacon, they were like, we should buy the mansion and turn it into an atheist community center, which I knew was a cool idea. So I had been to the mansion a few times. One of my friends was like living there for a while.
Well, and also when you say Penn Jillette had a mansion, I want to paint the picture because I know I've obviously not been to this mansion, but when we say mansion, it was like a rainbow explosion bunker out in the middle of the desert.
It almost looks like an amusement park or something.
Yeah,
like
it looked like Willy Wonka on acid. And Penn Jillette lived there.
Yes.
Apparently so did your friend.
Yeah. And he had like in the living room, like, like if you were going to take a mug shot, like you can just stand.
As one does in their living room.
Like a backdrop where you could take I remember that because I thought it was so weird. But it's because they called now I know why that was, because they called the mansion the Slammer. Was like, that's right. Yeah, so that was like the name for this was the Slammer.
Well, so in the magic community, that one's definition of weird versus normal is a little different. Just gonna leave it at that.
Yes. It was really cool. It was really cool. And I really don't know. It was like one day I just like walked into this secular church, and then the next day I was suddenly being invited over to Penn Jillette's mansion. Like, it was a weird time in my life. Like, I don't know how to explain it. That I just kind of got in with this community. And the other thing that was weird was that I had already started practicing Buddhism at this time, but because like Sam Harris had really gotten into like the mindfulness thing.
Oh, sure.
And like they were all like really interested in that. I even led a secular mindfulness thing for this group as well. Like, so it somehow it just kind of made sense at the time. I don't really know. So essentially, like, Penn wouldn't just like donate the mansion to them for like this community center. He wanted them to buy it from them. So they had to raise money to purchase the mansion. So they decided to do the show at the mansion, at the Slammer, to fundraise for the Atheist Community Center.
Okay. And
Penn Jillette's band was going to play, the No God Band.
Yes.
Then they needed another band to play, so they might have asked the Dirty Pennies and we couldn't do it. So the Negative Nancy's ended up playing. Yeah, so we just played the show at this Penn Jillette's mansion with like hundreds of atheists. And like, and I remember like they borrowed our gear. And I actually think that like they went first. They were like, we're not very good. So like, you guys should go. Like, it was,
what a pitch.
I'm like, but everyone's here to see you. Like,
wait, hold on. This is Penn who said this about his own band. He was saying that he should open for you because he's not very good. Did I hear that right?
Yes, I really think that they went first because I remember.
How is Penn Jillette not the headliner? It's his house. His name's on the show.
They didn't even use their own gear.
This is amazing.
I feel like they used our gear.
They used your gear? You had to sell your car to buy the massive, but Penn Jillette says, hey, can we use your gear?
I am so sure.
I love
you know what?
every piece of this story so much.
I want to look up this.
This is the most Penn Jillette story. So while you're looking that up, I want to jump in here because this is how you and I first became friends, because I remember, Penn Jillette has a podcast called Penn Sunday School, and I listen to Penn Sunday. I still listen to it. I've listened to it for probably, 15 years, however long it's been on. And I remember before you and I met, he did several episodes of his podcast where he was talking about this event that you're describing, how he was going to have to sell the Slammer and they were trying to do the whole thing. And there was going to be a show and a benefit. I think at one point he filmed a movie where they rented a tank or something and demolished the house or something. I don't even remember, but it was this whole very strange, very Penn-ish saga. And I remember like listening to it and just thinking, this is the most, I like Penn Jillette. I'm not a libertarian myself, but nor am I an atheist, but I enjoy Penn as an entertainer.
You're not an atheist?
No, shockingly, I'm not. But I remember listening to this and thinking, this is just the most insane life that this man has. And then when I got involved at the Interfaith Center at Miami, just as local Presbyterian pastor, and the program director's like, yeah, I was a band called the Dirty Panties, and we played with Penn Jillette at that Slammer. I was just like, what? That was the moment where I was like, you and I need to be BFFs and not just local colleagues.
Yeah, and I hadn't. It's funny because like to a lot of people that wouldn't mean anything, but you were like listening to this podcast and you had.
No, I lost my mind when you told me that.
But I swear that like they went first. They insisted on going first. That's so and funny. They used like all of our gear. And I remember that my bass drum kept sliding because they didn't even give us like a rug to put the bass drum on.
Oh my gosh.
And I remember there being like photos of people were just sitting. There were like people just sitting on stage in front of it, like holding the bass drum in place. And I think this was for both bands. So like it had to.
I'm sorry. I'm still stuck on Penn saying to you, maybe we should go first. We're not very good. I can't. Oh my Lord. Well, hey, let me switch gears a little bit. I mean, I don't want to spend too much time on this, although I certainly could, but I'm going to be merciful to the listeners here and not spend this whole podcast talking about Penn Jillette. But I did want to ask you about people getting confused about the sexuality in your music, particularly like the LGBTQIA experience. And you were talking about your first EP, Loaded Gun. There's a song that you did. I can't remember. I don't think it's on Loaded Gun, actually, but I feel like it might have been from around that era. It's one of my favorite songs of yours is called The Equation, featuring Switch.
Yeah.
I think that song is great. I think it's really funny and really catchy. First of all, could you explain to our listeners what the premise behind that song is?
I have confirmed that they used our gear. That's definitely my drum set in the photo. I'm going to send you these photos.
Yes. It's in the public record in the Las Vegas press. Eva Jade Landon's drum set. Somebody had to have taken photos of the No God Band playing, and yeah, just fun. Amazing.
So yeah, The Equation was much later. I had left Vegas and went to Kansas City. So I think I probably did that in like 2016. I don't really remember why I got inspired to do that. I put an ad on Craigslist looking for a rapper, because I had this idea in my head of this, like, how the hook that's in that song. Switch didn't write that. I wrote that.
Sure.
He wrote his part, like his verse. But like, I was like, this is what I wanted to say. So I put this ad out, like looking for somebody, and I find Switch, and like I was friends with someone at the time who had a recording studio. He had recorded the B Sharps. We had recorded an EP with him. And he and I became friends. And so I was like, hey, I have this idea for this pop song. Could you record it? And so we brought in Switch. I had never even met him before. And he just kind of like lays down this hook perfectly. It was like exactly how I imagined in my head. And then his verse was so good. And I was like, oh, this is perfect. And so then I was like, we need to make a video for this song. And so my friend who recorded the song, he was like, well, I have a camera. I can make. He's like, I've done a little bit of like filming video stuff. So he was like, I'll film it for you. This was the first time I was doing a pop song where I was fully kind of not only leaning into my sexuality, but making kind of a public critique on how people perceive female sexuality, because my whole life I've always received like the lines that are in this song about like, yeah, can we make it a 3 and like all of that.
Well, because the song is about a gay woman who's in a relationship with another woman, and Switch plays this fictional character of a straight guy who just like can't believe that you're gay, and he's like trying to be like, maybe you're bi or maybe it's this. It's really fun, and Switch is really funny in it. Like, he plays the character really well.
You're looking for something.
That woman, she's all that.
I'm sorry, fella, she's me.
I gotta get me some of that.
I'm sorry, fella, she's me.
Baby girl, how could that be?
Why is it so hard to believe?
How about we make it a 3?
This ain't your fantasy.
What I really enjoy about the song, first of all, it's a very catchy pop song. It's got a really catchy little melody to it, and it's very funny, but it also raises this conversation about straight misconceptions of the LGBTQIA plus experience. Like, oh, how could you not just exist to fulfill my male gaze, and all those kind of questions. That's something about your music that I really like. It is poppy and catchy, but a lot of your songs also raise legitimate conversations around these real life experiences. And that's where I think the substance of it really comes in.
Yeah, and I think that started with the equation. That was definitely not something I did with Evolution. You know, with Evolution, I was really just trying to make your typical solid pop record, and it's a very good album that I'm proud of, but this kind of like bringing this other piece of myself into my writing that I always did with my like the rock music and punk and all these things that I never did with pop. I started to say like, well, why can't pop talk about these things? Why can't it be a tool for this discourse? Because it is so much more palatable and accessible to people, like to the mainstream. So it should almost be the very place that it's kind of most important that we have those conversations. And I think I wanted to make something that was just very relatable too, because representation is very important. And this is something that I don't think any queer woman has ever not experienced, this idea that your relationship is only value like in proximity to a man, or that it isn't taken seriously. Now, I don't know how many times I've been asked if my girlfriend's my sister. A man can see me make out with another woman and be like, oh, you guys seem close. Are you sisters? And I'm like, how do you kiss your sister, sir? Like,
interesting Thanksgiving, I guess.
Right. Like, but it's because it's so out of their frame of reference that you could be sexually fulfilled by another woman.
Yeah.
And then there's always this idea that if a man approaches you and you say, oh, I'm gay, they're like, oh, I like girls too. And then it always kind of leads into that threesome conversation. And it's like, no, sir, I just like girls. There's a lot of things that I think that the equation kind of really hits at in a way that's like very funny, but also it really reflects like the reality of being like a queer woman. And that is definitely something I carried into Evolved. Yeah. Because Equation was so comical.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Which it was supposed to be. And we did like in the video, we had all these lesbian stereotypes with like the U-Haul. It was not as like critical, I think, as like you get in Evolved.
Hi, I'm back. Did you miss me? I'm just wondering if you're still listening. Turns out I've got a lot left to say, and I'm no longer standing in my own way. I hate to jump to conclusions, but there can be no substitution. Tuned in for the evolution, but are you here for the revolution? Evolved, evolved, evolved. Evolved, evolved, evolved. Evolved, evolved, evolved. Evolved, evolved, evolved.
I was going to ask you if, because your first full-length album is called Evolution and this album is called Evolved. It's not lost on me that there's little you know what I mean?
That was intentional.
Yeah. I wondered if that was more than just a fun little joke, if there was an intentional thematic continuity going from that album into this album. It sounds like there was, in the sense that you're wanting to be more intentional about putting those conversations directly into the music and not just like hinted at or danced around and things like that.
Yeah. Well, even in like the title track, Evolved, it's talking about how I'm no longer concerned with public perception and opinion. I think a lot of decisions that I made with Evolution weren't mine in many ways. You know, I would always defer to like who was the expert in like how you were supposed to market yourself and what, you know, what kind of image you wanted to have and what that looked like. And there were a lot of things that like retrospectively, I feel were bad calls because they weren't mine. And I think that my intuition would have been better. Like, for example, there's one music video that I made that I don't even have on the internet anymore because I hated the way it turned out. And it was because I took this person's advice who worked for Universal Records, who should have been the director, or sorry, she worked for Universal Music Group. And I let her view all of the film reels from the people who had submitted to do the video. And the guy she picked, like, I didn't like the reel at all. But I chose him because she said, like, this was... So there were just decisions that I kept making that I felt like weren't authentically mine, but they were also like Stay With Me Tonight, which is on the Loaded Gun EP. One of the most popular songs. It still is. Like, people love that song.
Yeah.
But I had someone from a label review, I think from Warner Music Group, all the tracks for Evolution, and said, oh, you need to leave that off. It sounds like 290s or something, or like they didn't like, and I did, and I left it off. And so I kept making decisions that just like, if I could go back and do it over, like I would do different. So I think like with Evolved, it was like, well, I'm just going to do whatever I want. Because I'm not trying to, and in that way, like I think this is a much more mature record in that it really has something to say. And it's not just about like having this nicely polished package of what people expect a female pop artist to produce. It has more depth to it. And it also is like 10 years later. Evolve just felt right. And when I wrote the title track, I was like, yeah, this makes sense. This is kind of where it lands.
You had sent me one of the tracks off the album, I don't know, I think a couple of weeks ago. I think I texted you back that it felt like I was listening to a cross between Lady Gaga and Maya Angelou. In a good way.
PhD, but the Supreme Court can still tell me my body has one purpose, to perform a timeless female service. Destiny is not my own. The world has made it fully known that I'm better off this way, and these four walls are here to stay. I know why the cage bird sings, and I know why the cage bird sings.
It is very poppy and dancey and catchy, but it's also very clear that you are going deeper into conversations that maybe you didn't have the freedom or the opportunity to do earlier when you're sort of restrained by labels and things like that.
Yeah. And I mean, well, obviously Freedom, the track Freedom uses a Maya Angelou reference in the hook. So that might have been it.
Yeah. And you don't see that in pop music very much. I mean, there are a lot of references. There's also I got very excited. There's a Billy Joel Easter egg in your new album. And
oh, yes, you guys saw that.
Oh, man. I love Billy Joel, and I'll let the listeners find that.
Billy Joel is my favorite songwriter. I mean, Billy Joel and Cole Porter, my two favorite songwriters of all time. Billy
Joel's up there with me as well. It was like a slow burn. I was listening to the track while I was also kind of working on something else. And I don't want to give it away because it's really neat. But as that moment was happening, like my brain was like, zzz, 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 like short circuit. Like, wait, like, what is that? And then I was like, oh my gosh, that's a Billy Joel riff. So I loved that. I want to ask you one more thing. Aside from being a touring pop star, you also have a secret identity. We talked about this a little earlier. In local interfaith work, you, as we've mentioned several times now, you and I first met through the Interfaith Center here in Ohio, where I served on the board of directors for about 3 years. And I know that interfaith dialogue is something that's very important to you, that you're very passionate about. And you talked a little bit earlier about how that seed got planted in your own life. I wanted to ask you, like, why do you think that kind of work is especially relevant now?
I would say that I still primarily identify with Zen Buddhism. I joined the Zen Center, like I was saying, back in that time when I was living in Las Vegas, and had been also doing this stuff with Sunday Assembly. But I also, I think have revisited, I was raised Catholic, like I mentioned earlier, so I think I've revisited Christianity in a more contemplative way, that I now have a deeper appreciation for it as well. I think that interfaith work, the reason that I think it's so uniquely important, and what really was the catalyst moment for me was that I always felt like drawn to all of these different social justice movements
Yes.
in different ways. And obviously I'm super that you can tell from this album that like women's rights, gender equity is very, very important. Like there's more patriarchal commentary on this record
Yeah, there's a lot.
any other subject, really. So like I'm definitely passionate about like these different areas of justice. And interfaith movement is the one space where like I feel they all intersect, because you don't really have to pick one issue. When you're in an interfaith context, it's, you know, you have people from all different religions and spiritual worldviews and secular as well welcomed into interfaith spaces. And so when you're looking for like, where's our point of commonality in terms of where do our morals align, where do our ethics align, where are we compelled to action, you're going to find that intersection in so many different areas, and you're able to collectively act on so many different issues. You know, because there's no one way that a religious person looks. They're not one gender, one race or ethnic identity or sexual orientation, or so it's kind of a point where they all meet, and you have to kind of be sensitive to all of the diversity in the room and all of the interests of that representation. You and I are on an interfaith board together. We have very different places that we're entering that space from. Sure. And we have to be mindful of our mutual interests and have respect for. So it sort of is this one place where you kind of have to talk about everything. And I think it also is uniquely powerful because it is a situation where you're not just trying to change the minds of individuals, but you're actually dealing with like bonded groups of people. So like if you go to your congregation and you say, hey, we really should care about climate change. And like, here's the theology behind that. Here's why we like our theology like leads us to that moral positioning. Then you can mobilize hundreds of people theoretically around this issue. So it's a way to like tap into like bonded groups of people based off of like a moral kind of faith positioning, which really can like compel people to advocacy and to action. And we saw this during the civil rights movement. We saw it in like apartheid in South Africa. Yes. When the World Council of Churches mobilized. So it works. And you can use it for good. But unfortunately, we live in a country where it's often used for bad. Yeah. Right? With like we just saw it happen with the reversal of Roe v. Wade, which also that's talked about on the record as well.
Yes, it is. It is. And very powerfully so.
Very like explicitly, you know, stating about the Supreme Court's decision. This movement is important because it has the potential for the most impact. You know, if we can, the same way that the right mobilizes faith communities to take people's rights away, we have the power to do the exact opposite, to mobilize, to be like a catalyst for change. The question is, can we? Or will we? I guess will we, not can we.
And I think it's also a really wonderful way for people in different faith communities to humanize people that they might not otherwise meet or encounter. If you're part of a faith community and you attend an event being led by someone from a different faith group that you have no experience with, it helps us. I mean, you and I were talking a little bit earlier about folks in our local community who are anxious about paganism, for example, because they don't know what it is, or they associate it with like devil worship or, you know, all this stuff. And then by being able to just have a little bit of contact with a group that they're not as familiar with, they're able to say, oh, well, that's not, my misconceptions are now being challenged or being reframed. And it helps us humanize one another so that we're not just painting cartoonish stereotypes that are neither helpful nor accurate. And I think that's really important. I remember anecdotally when you and I were on the board together, there was a year where we were trying to hire some student interns from the university. And I think we were having like some struggles with that, or it was taking us longer than we thought. I may be remembering the story wrong, so correct me. But I feel like you had talked with some of these student interns about the possibility of coming on board. And one of the things that you discovered was that just the fact that we had the word faith in the name of the center, the Interfaith Center, just that word, or even just a part of a word, communicated certain perceptions to the students, like, oh, I don't want to be part of that because that's going to look like X, Y, or Z. And by getting involved with what the Interfaith Center was actually doing, what the work was really about, by the end of the year, those student interns wound up saying, like, oh, I had no idea that now it's this really meaningful part of my time at the university and time as a student. And just being part of that helped them humanize that work. I love that story. And I think adults need to do that too, frankly.
Yeah. I think the word faith is so off-putting to certain people because there are so many people who have been harmed by faith.
Of course.
Faith communities, like I was saying. And especially when you're dealing with like marginalized communities, like the LGBTQIA+ community, a lot of people have really bad trauma. And I definitely saw that when I was in this atheist community. What I found sad about that was a lot of the time, it was almost like they became fundamentalists in their atheism. You could say like, hey, anyone can come in this space. You just can't talk about religion. But at the end of the day, if you are essentially telling people that they are idiotic because they have faith, then you're not creating like a welcoming space. I think that happens on both ends of the spectrum.
Sure.
Interfaith is like the middle ground of all of that. And I think, I don't know, maybe we do need a better word. Maybe we do need a word that doesn't, because I know a lot of times people they don't know what I do. And they're like, are you a pastor? And it's like, no, like not even close, and there's just a lot of misunderstanding. Like that word just conjures a lot of different inaccurate mental associations. So maybe we need a better word. I don't know, but I think that the story that you just gave, it does give us something to consider because we do have this kind of generational gap that's occurring in the movement. And how are we going to keep students engaged if even the word faith puts them off? Like, I think that we need to be more accountable and have more like efforts towards reconciliation with people that have been harmed. I just did a program recently about cults, and I got some pushback on that, but I thought it's really important to talk about. Cults aren't just religious.
Absolutely.
Right? They're also political. And, we're doing a lot of work with the LGBTQ community now as well. At the Interfaith Center, we have the Coming Out Day celebration on October 4th. That's going to be like a bigger in-person event. So I think we have to be more proactive in those ways. Statistically, if you know at least one person of a different faith, you're less likely to discriminate against people based on faith. So everything you said is completely true in the sense of humanization. That's statistically true because it's much harder to other someone that you're in relationship with. So if you can even just bring them in the space together, to even just have a meal or do a service project together. But if you don't enter that space and have that conversation, I think that we often fall into this trap with interfaith where we are kind of afraid of sitting in the tension. And I hope that we can get better about that, where we're not falling into like a spiritual bypassing almost, where we want to just, focus on commonality rather than difference. Because I think the difference is where the value sits, where we can really learn from one another to address all of the great crises of our time. I mean, I think that all of the world's religions have the wisdom. Indigenous traditions tell us how we should engage with the environment and live in reciprocity. Eastern religions, Buddhism, Hinduism, they show us how to deal with the problem of the self. And monotheistic religions teach us how to be in society and covenant with one another. Yeah. Like you collectively need all of these pieces or you're going to miss the point somewhere, and we always do.
Eva Jade Landon is a pop artist from the United States, now based in Germany. Her second full-length album, Evolved, is available on October 1st. You can check that out on Spotify, Apple Music, everywhere you like to put music into your audio device. Eva, it's so nice to get to talk to you. I always love getting to chat and getting to catch up, and I really appreciate you stopping by the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much.
That's going to just about bring us home, folks. My thanks again to Eva Jade Landon for taking the time to join us as my guest this episode. I would also like to thank you for taking the time to join us for this conversation on Don't Encourage This. If you'd like to hear other conversations like this one, you can check the show out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, and even the YouTube. But you knew that already because you're doing that right now. If you'd like to contact the show, the email address for this program can be found at don'tencouragethispodcast.com. From Oxford, Ohio, I'm Mark Von Bullock. We'll see you next time.